Number one, we welcome Leonardo Ban, who is from Boston University in the special school that looks at exactly these things, and Andrew Wrobel, who is the editorial chief of a most extraordinary website and I guess think tank, Emerging Europe. What an appropriate name for somebody, right? Anyway, welcome and thank you all so much for being here. I want to begin first asking you guys a show of hands. When you hear the words disorder and uncertainty, is that something that is to worry about and be concerned about? Who thinks it's worrisome about seeing disorder and uncertainty? Okay. Who sees it as something completely different? An opportunity, perhaps. Now, you can both say, I'm worried, but I'm also opportunistic, and I see it. That's where we are really going to go with all of this. But first, I want to begin with Professor Ban. And Professor Ban, I want to throw this question to both you and Andrew. Just throw something out there. Begin with something to tell this audience that you feel is either electrifying or shocking that this crowd might not know about yet about emerging Europe. Andrews.
Well, first of all, I'm really happy that, thank you for inviting me over here in the first place, but I'm really happy that this panel is actually called, or has in the title, the words Emerging Europe, because usually the region that we refer to is called, well, Central and Eastern Europe or Eastern Europe, and we don't really like that. And I will start with a quote. It's from a book called The Hidden Europe, What Eastern Europeans Can Teach Us. Back in the good old Cold War days, defining Eastern Europe was easy. It was made up of all those losers who were on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain. Eastern Europe had those backward communist countries which were frozen in the Stone Age. Unfortunately, this has repercussions now, because if you ask people in Lithuania or Estonia or Slovenia or Poland, no one really wants to say that they are from Eastern Europe. They will all say they're either a Nordic country like Lithuania, they're a Western country. So at the end of the day, it seems that there is no such an entity as Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, we call the region Emerging Europe because we believe that it's not a region that should. It's a region that should emerge, but not economically, because in most cases the region has, in quite a few countries have already emerged, and they would say they are developed countries like the Czech Republic, Slovenia, or Estonia. But we believe that this region should emerge from behind this Iron Curtain, lack of awareness, and I believe that we should all stop being ashamed in the first place, because people from Central and Eastern Europe, or people from Emerging Europe, they still feel ashamed and inferior that they come from this region, and they have a lot to offer. And if you look at the United States, slavery was abolished about 150 years ago. Now you can still see and feel that in southern states of the United States. Communism was finished about 30 years ago, and we have done so much over the 30 years that other countries like the UK or France or Germany were doing way longer. So let's stop being ashamed.
He is saying that many countries in emerging Europe, and you are representative of that in many ways, have what we call in America an inferiority complex. Don't do that. That is not the rest of the perception of the rest of the world. Maybe within your countries as they compare to France and Germany or the United Kingdom. When you hear the word emerging in America, people listen, they look up, and they think this is the next big thing. We call it the NBT. Professor Ban, how do you see it?
I think we should be both more sanguine about the fact that this region, which had been written off as the next basket case of the global economy, turned out to have been doing a lot better than most other promising regions in 1990. I mean, if you think of when I went to the United States to study for my PhD, people thought that Latin America was the next big thing. And in 1950s, people thought that Pakistan would be the next big thing. Eastern Europe was supposed to fall onto its sword of supposedly genetic disorders, ethnic warfare. They were supposed to be completely ruined by communism and so on and so forth. So I think we have much to be sort of vain about in that regard. Parts of Eastern Europe are more industrialized now than many old member states. This is a fact that's not entirely underlined. And I'm just not referring just to the poster children like the Czech Republic. This country is pretty industrialized as a share of GDP. Mm-hmm. It's, I think, number 5 in the EU, which is a bit of a shocker to many. As a share of manufacturing.
Not number GDP. 2? As highest growth? 4.8% is the GDP, right?
The share of manufacturing in total GDP.
Specifically manufacturing, yes. Okay.
Yes. But I think we have many things to be embarrassed about, and I think it's healthy to be embarrassed about things. That's how progress occurs. And I think one thing that we should be particularly awkward about is the fact that no other emerging regions has lost as many people to emigration as our region did. Especially, both Poland, the poster child of no crisis, pretty self-confident development patterns, and Romania, the big catch-up growth miracle, quote-unquote, of today. I think that mass emigration on such a scale, Romania is second largest after Syria in terms of migration outflows, suggests that something is deeply wrong in the region. And I think negotiating that schizophrenia, on the one hand, we're not the basket case we were supposed to be. On the other hand, what the hell is happening with millions of people who have left and do not plan to come back should be the source of productive tension that could move us forward, I think.
Germany, if you go back to post-World War II Germany, started to lose a lot of that brain trust. You don't want that to happen. And we just heard from the previous panel that something that seems to be rather simple to get done would really change the aperture. It would grow the aperture of using these countries as an opportunity, which is basic infrastructure, a road here and there, something that could get people to and from more easily different regions to do commerce. What else do you think is really needed? Andrew?
Well, I think when it comes to infrastructure, and if you look at Poland, for example, that has changed dramatically over, let's say, the last 10 years. You see roads from from the south to the north. You can easily go from the Ukrainian border all the way to Germany. There's a perfect highway there. But the question is it really bringing people back? Because if you look at the UK, you have 1 million Poles living in the UK right now, and Polish being the second most commonly spoken language in the UK. So, and among my friends, because I was born in Poland myself, and I don't hear anyone saying that they really want to go back to Poland. So I'm not really sure that infrastructure would really solve the problem. I don't think that any governmental programs would solve the problem. I think that the people have to really understand that there are opportunities open for them, and that has to be on a number of levels. They need to see that the economy is doing well, and also, for example, in the case of Poland, the political stage or environment is more friendly, I should say.
Let me show you how to turn that around, because we saw it in America. Over the past 2 decades, Chinese came in droves to go to Chinese universities, American universities rather. They moved heaven and earth to be able to get to the US, stay there, hang out in Silicon Valley or Austin, which is sort of the next hot area, and they wanted to set up businesses. But guess what has happened in the last 5 to 7 years? They're going back to China now because they feel that's the next opportunity. Their own country is making it so much easier for them to come back and want to come back. And start their own businesses. I think they do it from government funding. I know Romania has some opportunities where they will dangle pockets of money to certain companies that can prove they have a good business plan. So maybe that's the way to turn it around, Professor.
I think that there's one more issue. Sorry if I can interrupt. I think there's one more issue. The thing is that if you have lived in the UK, for example, for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, and let's say you started a business there, you've been developing that business for, let's say, 3, 4 years, and now you think of coming back to Poland or Romania. I can't say what it's like in Romania, but I would say that this is pretty much the same. If I want to communicate with the tax office in the UK, this is really straightforward. I call them up and I say, this is the issue that I have. And it's not that they by default say that I want to deceive them or that I want to hide something. When you go to Poland, for instance, the first thing you hear from the tax office is that you're evading taxes. So you need to be, they need to watch you. Recently, the government wanted to introduce a new law for those who evade VAT, and you can be sentenced for 25 years for tax evasion. For me, this is a clear sign that, well, I wouldn't like to go back. If I were to do business there, and I would face this, prison time.
Then it is the government that must either salt and fund some of the startups, but also, and this is happening now with Donald Trump in America, try and cut down on at least some of the regulation that prevents people from wanting to do business. I mean, there are something like 20,000 pages of regulations that people have to go through depending on what industry you're in. But where do you stand on this, Professor? That the governments must do things to generate some more opportunity for people to stay or come back from whence they left.
Okay, I'm going to express a poisoned agreement with both of you. In the sense that I agree that institutional reform is necessary to have governments that make our life easier. And for the year I'm on my sabbatical in Denmark, where it took me about 17 minutes to get my Danish residency, work permits, and so on and so forth. They asked me for 3 papers. The entire government interface between citizen and the state is on a single app on your phone, including your bank accounts and so on. They even do your taxes and send them to you and say, do you agree or not? Press. So I agree, but at the same time, why is this a poisoned remark? It is poisoned because I think that the liberal model of take down the state in order to unleash markets doesn't work. I think that we are paying for that with crazy political turmoil everywhere. And the Danish case that I invoked is not coincidental. This is a very interventionist state when it comes to redistribution and intervening in high niches of the economy. So it's an empowering state. It creates a social solidarity that enables people to see their future in the country itself rather than elsewhere. It keeps talent there, while generating you take any index of social development that you want, any index, and take any index of the conservative right in the United States, Fraser Institute. What are the countries that come on top in terms of friendliness to business? It's the Nordic countries. Take the UN leftist indexes on social development. They come on top ahead of everyone else. So what I'm saying is that where this reform of the state is going, is an important political matter. And I personally uphold the view that focuses on, yes, simplifying the state in relations to its citizens, but giving the state a lot more resources than the current way in which we think about this gives it. So I see 4 structural bottlenecks for the region in that regard. And they all require a different state. The first one is, in a way, like Americans, East Europeans love their cars. They really do. So when they say infrastructure, they mean highways and roads and parking spaces. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's suicidal for the well-known environmental reasons, but also from the perspective of livable cities, keeping the labor force there and making it mobile. We have pockets of poverty in eastern Poland and eastern Romania and southern Hungary that cannot be moved into the labor markets. The reason is that we don't have a viable rail system that can move people to commute into labor markets where the wages are high, right? So that's the first one. So I think we need a paradigm shift on transportation, and that's not a small matter. It's a multi-decade planning. Yeah. If you look at successful societies, this is what they're doing. They're not doing cars anymore. The second one is we have to rethink the way we conceptualize finance. The most successful industrial economy in Europe, Germany, has 30% of its assets in a state-owned bank, KfW. Without KfW, German capital would not have the 10, 15 years long-term horizons for investing in high-end technologies. We don't have that. We believe the market will take care of everything. What did we get? We got a financial enclave that buys government bonds and gives consumer credit, but doesn't invest in our export sector, right? So that's the second one. And finally, the third one is people are also leaving because ultimately the migration networks have been established. It is closer to move from a village south of Bucharest, not to Bucharest, but to London in mental terms. So without wage-led growth, I think we are doomed demographically, and we're going to enter a long-term stagnation.
Okay, so let me distill some of that. When he says wage net growth.
Wage-led growth.
Right,
yeah.
Yes. It's really important that when you start to see pressures on things like what people make, and I believe Romania has one of the lowest minimum wage levels. It's extraordinarily important when they start to come in really educated with skills, which is what the universities here pump out. Really smart, really motivated workforces for tomorrow's economies. Problem with America is they're not doing that right now. We need very much to overhaul the educational system, yes, to look like yours in certain ways. Pump out these students who graduate and they know how to engineer, they know how to code, they know how to be more international in their thinking. But when you jump to something like the new economic world order, we should define that a little bit. What is that? Well, there's post-Brexit. How can all of these emerging markets capitalize on a void that has now been opened, a huge gap post-Brexit as it develops into that? What about China? China's market is a Godzilla, a gigantic monster that is still growing. That's possibly an opportunity. And then, of course, you see on the other side of the coin, the countries that are stumbling when it comes to bringing in people and growing. Which countries in emerging Europe do you think, Andrew, are doing it best?
Well, definitely Romania is in the leading position with the growth. We already mentioned that. I think that there is a lot of opportunities in Ukraine, despite the situation with in the eastern part of the country. I think that there is, obviously some reforms are needed there to push it forward, and also the government needs to understand, and also the people have to understand that. I think that I would dare say that Belarus would be an interesting country, completely unknown. I'm pretty sure that if I ask any one of you here what their image of Belarus is, they would say, I don't know, maybe Romania from 20 years ago or something like that. You would be surprised that the country looks, you would leave this place and you could be in Minsk, actually. It looks exactly the same. It's very well developed, but unfortunately we know very little about that. So I think, Poland has been the child, the wonder child of the region. I think right now...
Hold on, you've got Romanians in this audience too. They're probably, wait, what about us?
No,
Are they the cousin?
They've been an example of this, and actually you mentioned that as well earlier. They've been this example of great growth over the first 25 years, and also in the time of recession, where you had countries that kind of whose economies shrank. You had Poland with a growth, still a couple of % growth. So But I think right now the government is taking a couple of steps backwards. So they're not really helping the country develop.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to add one more thing to what we were talking about earlier. I think that the governments have to do things to bring people back, but I also think that our attitudes have to change. I mentioned this tax office thing. I think each of us here in this region always has this second thought that maybe someone is trying to deceive us. And I think that each of us should start from ourselves, basically, and we should say, okay, let's give more trust to people, and let's expect the good from them, not that they are going to actually deceive us.
Yeah, there's a term for that, trust but verify. All right,
Yes.
we know this. Have you heard the term, anybody here, G0? We know G20, we know G10-7. Anybody heard G0? It was a term that was coined by my friend Ian Bremer, who runs the Eurasia Group, and he travels all over the place. I don't even want to know what his frequent flyer miles are. It's unbelievable. But he coined the term G0, and in essence it means a world, which he says we are in now, where no single country or single block of countries has the almighty power and the economic leverage. I want to go back to the UK, for example. There are you just said 1 million Poles, right?
Yes.
Living there. There are 500,000 Romanians who live there. And there's been so much concern for people who emigrated and went to the United Kingdom. What's going to happen now that they're not allowing Schengen and the open borders? Boris Johnson, who was the mayor of London and is now big in the upper edges of government, has said, here in Romania rather recently, we'd be crazy to let the Romanians go. They are so much a part of our country. Well, that should be a message to many countries that that's what happens when you have a great educational system and you educate your people and you make it affordable. But you both just touched on regulation and how it was easier for you, 17 minutes?
Yes.
When you were in
a socialist country, yeah?
Right, and this was, tell me again?
Denmark.
Denmark,
Yes.
okay. So when you were in Denmark and you feel that as soon as you go to a government agency in Poland, it's, what are you trying to rip off from us? What are you trying to do here? One of the changes that we've seen in America, one of the good changes, there have been some bad, but is that President Trump has tried to scale back regulation that has literally ruined entrepreneurs' dreams. For example, if you want to open a restaurant in America, they will come in a surprise sort of investigation without telling you, and if your napkin is shorter than the fork, they'll shut you down. Because they say it's not sanitary if the fork tines at the top breach the top of the napkin. I mean, is this insane or what? There are some very important regulations that we have that make us a really safe and wonderful place to work, but it's that could unleash the power. Fewer regulations, nothing related to real safety, but that would really help.
Yes, I mean, this country invented Dadaism, and a theory of the absurd, and my interaction with the American Department of Motor Vehicles is very much like a Dadaist poetry.
Yes.
I mean, it's truly.
I just went through it.
And if you're not a U.S. citizen, it takes about 9 hours of standing up in a line to do the simplest operation.
Does it make you feel better that I stood for 6 as a U.S. citizen?
You practice arbitrage on that front, eh?
Yeah, we can play that.
So yeah, I mean, but again, the question is, of course, some environmental regulations are absolutely necessary, right? But there's the absurd, the long list of things that I think American and Romanian government have in common. For example, it's so difficult to get simple paperwork done here as well. So in a way, I think that having a deregulation on the things that are simply a problem of bureaucratic inefficiency, and having regulation and more government intervention on things that were not needed, say childcare in the United States. It's absurd. It's great to be a woman in the US until you become a mother. Then you lose your entire income on childcare. Yeah. So I think that we need basically a European-style state on that level, right? That requires tax money. I don't think that the current direction of the administration in terms of fiscal policy is going to make that possible in the future. So, yes, I am for big government, but it doesn't have to be heavy-handed government in terms of regulations. It could be big government in terms of spending.
Yes, smart government. We're about to open it to questions, so please be thinking, and you can ask any one of us anything that you would like that you feel pertains to this. And then I guess here when we're talking about this world order, Andrew, there are companies that have done so well. But then there's also fear, and this is the prism that we look through that's sort of in the side peripheral vision that's worrisome, and that is this overhang of uncertainty. Now, I can tell you that in America, after the financial crisis, there was so much uncertainty, almost every country shut their wallets and said, we're not spending, we're too nervous, we're not hiring, we're too nervous. But if you look at the number of startups that began during this financial crisis, where all the big established companies were terrified and not spending. You ready? Uber, Airbnb, a company called Warby Parker, which makes eyeglasses, but it's such a much easier process than having to go to the optometrist and wait and then order the glasses. It comes like this. And then you go back to the early days, where during other major recessions, IBM was begun. FedEx. First thing I saw when we landed here at the airport was a FedEx truck zooming around, and I thought, this started as a university project by Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, and it turned from a university project into trucks running around emerging Europe. This is incredible. Uncertainty to me is a cop-out. It's an excuse. For real entrepreneurs, you just dive right in. And you see that, don't you?
I just wanted to give you an example here.
Please.
We were talking about Ukraine. I talked about Ukraine for a second, and we actually ran a special report on Ukraine, and I had the pleasure of talking to a number of different businesses, especially in eastern Ukraine. And you would be surprised that we do a lot of outsourcing stuff. So because the region is really sort of strong in IT, and we know that. And when you speak to companies from eastern Ukraine, when they had to deliver their products or services immediately, and there was a war going on, 2 streets away, they had to wrap up everything, pack it, and move it out of that region, and go to eastern Ukraine, to western Ukraine, go to Belarus, go to Poland, Spain, and actually grew even faster because they were so agile, so prepared in a way to act. So I totally agree that this should not be perceived as an obstacle. It should be perceived as an opportunity, actually.
Well, use Israel as a perfect example of that. Israel is a nation that is surrounded entirely by enemies, constantly under attack, and they are the most motivated workforce out there, and you could have looked at them as an emerging market, and in a very short time, you have Intel there, Advanced Micro Devices, Yahoo, Microsoft. When you drive from Jerusalem to Herzliya, this is what you see. You may as well be in Silicon Valley. You can think about all of the companies that have sprouted up and then been bought. I mean, Waze is our favorite in America. Do you all have Waze here? It's the mapping device that you never get lost, thanks to the Israelis, who, of course, were bought by Google. Anyway, we do want to open this to questions right now, and I'd love you to raise your hand, and again, state whom you are and whom you represent and what company, and as you're getting the microphones here, you want to make a point.
Two things before we do
Absolutely.
That, so I think that's a great point, Liz, but take the iPhone, right? One of the greatest breakthroughs in this new creative destruction you mentioned since the crisis. It incorporates 5 breakthrough innovations that all came from government research programs with universities, a purely public project. The only thing that Steve Jobs did was to integrate the 5 of them. So there is an interaction effect. And you take the internet, take biotech, fintech, you name it. It's not, venture capital came later, after 10 years of research were done in public ventures. Europe doesn't have that, and I think we should shortcut Western Europe by having that kind of model.
Do we have a question? Anybody with the microphone? Yes. Oh, yes, sir. Go ahead.
Sure. I'm Tyson Barker from Aspen, Germany. So when I got off the plane, the first company I saw was Lukoil. And of course, Lukoil is a Russian company, represents a very different model of an emergent Europe, Russia, state-owned enterprises, closed system, very statist. And the truth is that this model is somewhat making a comeback in this region. Maybe not as heavy-handed as it is taking place in Russia, but I'd be interested to know what you guys think of the idea of a more illiberal statist version of economic management in this new emerging economic order.
Sorry, I need you to clarify.
Sure.
Illiberal, did you just say?
Illiberal, yes. So Viktor Orban, for example, said that, he has a model for an illiberal democracy, much more state-managed, much more commodities-based, much more closed, less free trade, that kind of thing. And I'd be interested to know what role that plays in the region right now.
By the way, I get my gasoline in New Jersey at Lukoil. It's just the same, exactly the same. Who wants to take that? You want to go, Professor?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think it's a great point, and I think authoritarians don't get punished by the bond markets like people anticipated. Hungary wasn't shorted by the bond market. People keep investing there. Singapore, one of the best run countries in the world, is an authoritarian regime. So you can have, the sad lesson of political economy is that you can have authoritarian political regimes that are economically liberal and very integrated in global capital flows. So the question is, of course, normatively, I'm against having a liberal regime. But let's look at Germany, where you come from. Is Germany really a liberal economic regime? It really isn't. It's a corporatist coordination between labor unions and capital organizations, employer organizations. It has a huge state-owned bank, and it's doing really well. So I think we should multiply the menu. I think in Eastern Europe, the menu was states versus markets. And I think that really closed down the imagination as to what's possible. And I think that's one of the sources of the problems we have today, the fact that it was too narrow. I personally am for a more coordinated, statist, sort of social democratic variety of market economy in Eastern Europe. I think that's the only one that can really modernize us. I think the kind of pure market model has reached its limits here. And now we're paying with electoral rioting, demographic outflows, and aging.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. I don't know if you are familiar with a paper written by, it's a recent one, Novokmet and Piketty. This is about foreign-owned countries. And when it comes to the region, and Hungary, for example, 64% of countries' GDP, this is foreign direct investment. So pretty much we can say that the country is owned by foreigners, or we can also say that this is an economic colony. So when we talk, I would like to refer to Orban, for example, or those more populist and nationalistic trends in the region. I think we should have thought about it a bit earlier to nationalize, to think that we are actually owned by somebody else than now. I think it's slightly too late for that.
Let me just say that in advance of coming here, I do a bunch of interviews with CEOs of various companies. The last final 3 interviews I did with 3 CEOs, just afterward I asked, by any chance, do you have workers or operations in Eastern Europe? All 3 said Romania. Mirsha, you should be proud of this. You should be very happy because you've created or helped create this atmosphere. Number 1, IMAX, the widescreen movie theater. They have a screen here and they have some employees. Even more, TiVo, the DVR, the digital video recording system. They bought a Romanian company outright to do much of their engineering and coding work. And number 3, A company in America that has 700 employees here in Romania is Harman Audio. They do audio for cars. They do audio for the Super Bowl. They do audio for the Grammy Awards, the music awards. And that should be testament to all that's happening here in Romania. Do we have any more questions? Yes, sir.
Samuel Burke, CNN. I want to get back to the comparison you were making about the Chinese coming to the United States and now leaving. And I'm interested to see if you guys think that given Brexit, everybody's talking about all the opportunities that Romania has becoming a closer member inside the EU, and Brexit leaving it, and given the huge amount of Romanians, if Polish is the second language of the UK, Romanian must be the third. Does that present opportunities? Maybe people want to come back. I know our housekeeper in London is thinking about it, and she may be anecdotal, but you do hear a lot of people at the very least considering. So is that a time for Romania to capitalize?
From my perspective, I would say the only reason would be for them to leave if there are no regulations in place that will allow them to stay. So the Prime Minister...
You're saying that they want to stay in foreign countries.
Yes. The problem might be that they will not be able to stay because of the settlement status, for example, that is being conjured up right now.
Right.
So that might be the reason. But other than that, I wouldn't hold my breath, really, here. I wouldn't wait. I wouldn't expect a huge wave.
Professor, fight back on that.
Well, it depends. I think we have to be careful here. We have to distinguish between the high and the low ends of the labor market for Romanian or Polish diaspora in the UK. I think I wouldn't hold my breath for the low end of the spectrum, because those people, if they return to the Romanian labor market, they're going to get pretty low wages and purchase power. They will not benefit from the economic expansion in cities like Bucharest or Cluj, which are above the EU average already. They are not poor cities anymore. But most importantly, they will have access to very bad public services, especially to hospitals. I've done some research on the Romanian diaspora in Italy. This is number one thing they're worried about, going to a hospital in Romania. So again, right, there's an undersupply of public goods that we have not worked on for a long time. We've neglected that, forgetting that's a source of comparative advantage on the labor market, because we never thought that people actually do this kind of arbitrage. And then with regard to the high end of the labor market, there is already a return migration, especially IT sector, people owning private hospitals. They report that Romanian doctors return to these large cities, but it's not a mass phenomenon. And we've had countless strategies at the government level. Mircea has put together something like that. It's extremely difficult. We don't have the fiscal resources to do it because we don't tax well enough. We have a ridiculous way of revenue raising system. So without what I said earlier on, lifting up the boats with a combination of minimum wage policies and strengthening labor unions to push up wages, I don't have any hope that the low and the middle skill of the Romanian labor market in diaspora will come back.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm hearing the questioner correctly, there is that worry that if you give the government more power and more money, that somehow they may return to something even close to what Romania had, the horrific Ceausescu regime. That's why money is not the answer to everything. If you look at America, we spend the most per capita on our students in public school, and we do not rank as high as many other countries who spend less. It's got to be smart spending, and therefore, it has to have regulatory framework that things can only be used to incentivize entrepreneurs who have a quality business plan and who understand that they have to deliver in that regard, and you don't give it all at once. You give it in tranches, stages. Certainly, I think that's important. I just want to bring up one thing, because I think psychologically, this goes back to the everyone's uncertain and everybody's nervous. After what happened, and it's okay, I can bring this up because not only am I half Romanian, I'm also half Russian. What Russia did with Crimea suddenly cast a cloud, I believe, over perhaps some regions, some countries that used to be under the thumb of the Soviet Union. They just held war games in Belarus, I believe.
Yes.
And Putin went and got that press out. We saw it in America. He's looking in binoculars and he's wearing his camouflage, and that made people concerned that that's his next step encroaching and trying to get back that Soviet Union grand strength. Do businesses look at that as uncertainty, Andrew?
To be honest, it's a difficult question because I haven't noticed anything like that. I would say it's more individuals, especially, for example, in the Baltic states because of the Russian population there. But I haven't really heard any examples.
Well, maybe some of that money that should be going to businesses and entrepreneurs is directed toward building up the NATO troops. You know, Romania, I was just hearing this last night, Harlan told me, pound for pound, person for person, lost more soldiers in Afghanistan because they're members of NATO and they went in there, and that was their pride of being part of NATO. A lot of that costs money. And then they may be looking at this thinking, we need to divert some money that would have been spent on infrastructure or incentivizing businesses to go help build up the situation on the Black Sea. That's the only reason I answer that. I don't know the answer. So we don't know yet. Okay.
I don't think so.
All right. Yes, my friend from Turkey.
Thanks. Muzaffer Şener, that this is the second time, do not want table is that. My question is relating with the Russian strengthening ties in the Black Sea. That not only with the Crimea, but the invasion of Crimea, but relating with the, let's say, politically strengthening its ties militarily as well with Turkey.
Yeah, we saw
and then
that
how they see
yesterday,
that this,
right?
and also their presence in Georgia, the invasion of, let's say, semi-invasion of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. These, let's say, as a member of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, that they are in Armenia, the presence is so important. And as a EU member, the pro-Russian president in Bulgaria, and which is also its impact on Moldova. How do you see this Russian strengthening ties, which will be a threat or challenges, or I want to hear your evaluation on those developments.
Would you like?
I'm a complete idiot on foreign policy, so I would refrain from saying anything.
Okay, you could have fooled me well, Mr. Emerging Europe.
Well, we have that. I mean, we see the Russians, but also we see the Chinese coming to the region. Well, it's not about politics. I don't really have an answer to that. I think if you, I'm thinking about Hungary as well because, well, the Prime Minister has often been criticized as Mr. Putin's friend, so sort of bringing Russia closer to the region. The same is with Serbia to some extent. I'm thinking about Armenia. My recent discussion with the Minister of Finance there, who I also went to Georgia recently, and I'm trying to compare those two countries. And when I spoke to the finance minister of Armenia, he said that there's just no other way for them to be linked anywhere. I mean, to any other region. It's just Russia because it's so close to where they are. But if you look at Georgia, then, well, Georgia is just across the border. And then pretty much everywhere you go, you see European flags. And this pro-European spirit is significantly stronger. This is what I would say here, I think.
Well, I think that there's something extraordinary that's happening here today, tomorrow, and in the future, particularly in March of 2019, the day before England and the United Kingdom officially tear themselves away through Brexit. The European Council will have the rotating presidency begin here in Romania. This will provide, in my opinion, a huge sense of togetherness and really legitimizes Romania, which is dying to get on the, I believe, to get on the Eurozone system where you use the euro, but also Schengen. Schengen will help, I believe, maybe there are some disagreements, will perhaps help with trade, make it a lot easier, and that's a good thing. And I can tell you in America, where the president right now is talking about closing borders, that's not a good thing. There are a lot of businesses, which I cover, who are terrified, and many of these people are Republican. They supported the president, and then they hear that the president might want to actually tax things that are coming in, and there's this whole made in America pride thing that he's going on. I think that he doesn't understand that it should be assembled in America. That's what he's thinking, because anymore, in America, they are importing parts to then make their goods to stamp made in America. And so opening borders and keeping them open is a very important thing. As we finish up here, I would just like to say that it is such an honor for me to have been invited here. I believe, what, Mirsha, were you at Fox 6 years ago, 5 years ago? My producer said one day, he's a very important man from Romania in politics and in business is coming, and his name is Mircea Joana, and we said, great, let's put the guy on, you know? And he came on, and when he found that I had roots here in Romania, he said to me, you must come to Romania. And so I am here. And for that, I thank Mircea, and I thank the Aspen Institute and all the sponsors here today. Thank you so much, Professor Bond and Mr. Wrobel. Thank you very much.